So many times we put our power into the things that are very toxic, which is anger, resentment. I'm going to hold you in this space because what you did was wrong. And that's where also forgiveness comes into, because when you step into that place of forgiveness, there is so much strength in handing your pain back to the person that hurt you most, and to then bring in the freedom and peace that ultimately you are here to live in. And so many times we mistake that, because here's where it comes from. Society teaches us that if you're going to forgive, that then it is to forget that something happened to you, which is interesting because I don't forget and I don't condone what happened to me. Okay. There is no way, that I'm just going to sit there and say what you did is okay. I'm looking at him and saying what you did is wrong. What I'm not going to do is to hold on to the pain that you handed to me.
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the show and choosing this podcast to spend some time with. I know there are a ton of amazing podcasts out there, and I am a big supporter of podcasts in general because I know they've played a big role in my life in terms of, I don't know, there was a while there where I used to listen to the news first thing in the morning all the time. And then I switched to TED Talks and podcasts, and it made a huge difference in my life, just starting my day listening to something positive and inspiring and thought-provoking versus negative and scary and fear-based. So I'm just a big fan of podcasts. And so if you're listening to any of them, that's amazing. And the fact that you found yourself here and you're listening to mine is, of course, even more amazing. And so I just always want to take a moment to thank you, whether you've been following along for a while or this is your first time checking us out. Just thank you for choosing us or me or the podcast or whatever. Okay, so a couple quick announcements. If you've been listening for the past couple episodes, then you know this, but for those who maybe haven't heard it, just to let everybody know, we're going to continue to have new episodes throughout the rest of November. So there's only, counting this one, 3 more left. And then in December, I'm going to re-air kind of the best of or listener favorites. So if you have a podcast episode that you really enjoyed and really spoke to you, then just let me know. You can shoot me a DM on Instagram or Facebook or send me an email at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com and let me know which one you really enjoyed so that can be considered for December. And the reason I'm doing that is to just take a little bit of time off. I was actually just saying on Instagram Live, because I've started going live as I record these intros, that my energy is just down. And I don't know if it was just because of the past week that we've had just as a country, or if it's just I can be go for a couple days and then I kind of hit a wall. But I'm feeling I need a little bit of a break. But I want to go into total planning and organization mode for 2021, because I'm going to be more organized in terms of what the different topics that we discuss each week on the podcast. So there's going to be kind of this cadence of addressing all aspects of our relationship with self. So mind, body, spirit or soul, maybe science. I'm going to have more people that just have really interesting stories to share. And then I'm probably going to do more solo episodes as well. So that takes a little bit more intentional planning. And so that's the mode I'm going to shift in December. So again, new episodes to finish out November, and then December will be a little bit of a break, airing our favorites of the podcast, and then we will start fresh in 2021. So then I guess my only other note podcast related is if you have not already left a rating or written a short review, please take like 2 seconds to do that on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. If it accepts ratings and reviews, I think a lot of them do at this point in time, but it really helps a lot in terms of discoverability among the different podcast platforms. There's a ton of podcasts out there now, which is a great thing. But in terms of like playing with the algorithms or whatever, the more ratings and reviews you have, the better it is for your show. And I'm definitely working to grow the show. And so if you guys can help me do that by leaving a rating and writing a short review, I would very much appreciate that. Okay, so this week's episode, just get ready. It's going to make you want to just like walk outside, get out in nature. It definitely made me like have that itch to kind of just book some kind of a trip, go hiking in the mountains, like wherever, somewhere, just like get outside and be in nature. It's an incredible story. This guest has just so much insight. And she's got a book out which we will be discussing, which is actually out today. It'll be out the day that this episode airs, November 10th. So I will link in the show notes where you can find that. And we talk about the book in the episode, but just if you can listen to this episode outside, I think that would be really cool. So if you have the ability to walk outside or even maybe just like open a window or whatever to listen to this episode, I think that would make it that much more powerful. So then I also want to give you guys a couple of the previous episodes to listen to that kind of fall in line with some of the topics we discuss in today's episode in case you want to go a little bit deeper with them. So we talk a lot about nature, and we do mention like the awe and wonder effect that nature can have on us. Like I know I share like a lot of times I'll walk outside early in the morning, and when I see the moon or the stars, like it literally does kind of just take my breath away and causes me to like almost just step back for a second. And that's actually like a really, really powerful thing. And so if you guys have ever experienced that, listen to episode 56, Exploring the 10 Worlds of Happiness with Dr. Ash Eldafrawi. And that is, as the title says, like he and this like partner of his wrote this book where they're looking at happiness in terms of like 10 different definitions. And so they call them worlds. And then like the highest level, almost more kind of like the enlightenment level, you get a lot into those feelings of awe and wonder, and that's how you end up seeing life. And I think spending more time in nature gives you like a glimpse into what that's like. So listen to that episode if you haven't already. And then another really just great example of, I don't know, our resilience and kind of our ability to go through really heartbreaking and difficult times, yet work through them and heal. Krista O'Reilly Davy-Dickey has a lot of insight in that area and for very personal reasons. And so you can hear her story in episode 52, You're Imperfect, Life is Messy, Show Up Anyway. Another just really a great example of resilience, I'll say that. And then we talk a lot about trauma. Today's guest has been through some major traumas, and we talk about like working through that and healing. But back in episode 7, so way back in the beginning of the podcast, I had a guest on, a therapist, that we talk about like how that trauma stays in your body. So that's episode 7, How the Body Remembers What the Mind Tries to Forget, with Amy Pope Latham. And so I think that's another really interesting take on trauma and how when we try and just suppress it and not deal with the pain and just, pretend it's not there, sweep it under the rug, whatever, while we might be able to forget it for a short time, like mentally, our body is remembering it and it holds on to that energy. So that's a really interesting episode in conjunction with today's episode. And then we also have a former guest who has some really big and exciting news. So this is way back in the podcast archives, episode 4, Saving Ourselves, with Mel Stevens. And she has a book out. So I'm so proud of her. I'm so happy for her. This is something I know she has wanted to do since I've known her and connected with her. The book is titled Home is Where You Are. It's a fiction book. It's getting incredible reviews. Like I keep seeing it online, and I'm so happy for her. And I love it, like, because her episode also ties into today's conversation just about how it all starts with us. We can't find healing or validation or any of that externally, like outward. Like, we've got to go within and save ourselves first, which is the title of her episode. So listen to that one if you haven't already, and go to melissgracewrites.com and check out her book. It is titled Home is Where You Are. If you're looking for just a light, feel good, like, this is like a self-care book, because it's not like personal development, like kind of work you through all the healing and the difficult stuff. It's more just give yourself a break, read something that just makes you smile and feel good, and also support a former guest of the show. So congratulations, Mel. I'm so happy for you. Again, everyone, you can find her book on Amazon or go to her website, melissgracewrites, WRITES.com, and I will link to that in the show notes as well. And then make sure you are subscribed, because next week we have Casey Castro, who owns a yoga studio in Australia. So her and I connected across the world. She has an amazing Australian accent, which I always find just, I don't know, like relaxing to talk to people with Australian accents. But it's a great follow-up to today's episode, because she just gets really real about kind of this pressure we can feel to do all this self-care stuff, and then couple that with balancing work and family obligations. And so she's a mother of 4, and she used to have a real high power corporate job. She left all that. Now she owns a yoga studio. And so she has a really unique and great perspective on balancing all of it. And essentially we kind of agree that, I think especially when you're a mother, which I am not, but if you guys listening are, like, sometimes that balance is bullshit. Like, you can't really find it, how everyone is out there saying like, oh, like, you can do it all and you can have it all. And like, maybe you can't for certain chapters of your life, and that's perfectly okay. So it's a great conversation, very real. And she has an amazing Australian accent. So make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss that one. All right. So let's learn more about today's guest. Sara Schulting Kranz is a professional life and leadership coach, motivational speaker, and certified wilderness guide. She specializes in helping those who have suffered hardship or trauma to find forgiveness and strength in their lives through guided wilderness retreats in locations such as the Grand Canyon and the Pacific Rim. Her upcoming book, Walk Through This, Harness the Healing Power of Nature and Travel the Road to Forgiveness, releases November 10th, 2020, which is today. If you're listening on Tuesday when this episode releases, or really no matter when you are listening to this, the book is now out. So you are able to go to her website, which I will link to in the show notes, or Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you find books, you can find her book. And in this episode, we discuss her incredible story, including the major traumas she's been through and how she came around to writing a book about forgiveness and healing. Our tendency to compare our journeys and our pain to others, and why instead we should honor our unique journey. How to shift from seeing life as happening to you to happening for you. Why it's so difficult to forgive people who have hurt us, and the power in releasing our pain. Setting intentions versus goals and opening ourselves up to what life has to offer us. The importance of knowing our values and being in touch with our inner compass. How connected we all are, and how being in nature can help remind us of that. How to define our self-worth. Our tendency to get so comfortable with our pain that it gets difficult to receive and sit with happiness. The process of forgiving ourselves, and the importance of taking time to be with ourselves. Again, if you can step outside to listen to this episode, I highly recommend that. And just heads up, you're going to want to like book some kind of a hiking, mountain, vacation, retreat type thing to work through this book. It's definitely something I want to do. I've already talked to a couple friends about it, like maybe just finding like a cheap Airbnb somewhere where there's hiking trails, and like working through this book as we like hang out in nature and hike. And I think that could be a really fun thing to do, especially as we close out this year, to just prepare all of ourselves for a new year. It has been a wild ride of a year. I think we probably all have a lot of healing to do from it on some level. So this book has come out at the perfect time. Okay, so I'm going to stop just chatting, and we're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Sara. So I want to start with a little bit of your story, obviously, because that ties very much into the work that you do now and the book that you just had released. So I know there's a lot in that, but if you can kind of give us a nice Cliff Notes overview of kind of what led you to writing a book about forgiveness, essentially.
Yeah.
And
And healing. I know, right? I know it is hard when people ask me that question, what made you get to write this book? It's difficult to put it into just a few words because it's so complex. I will give you the kind of the nut and bolts version of it. So I've lived through multiple traumas in my life. The first one happened when I was 17 years old. I was raped by somebody that I knew, and
Mhm.
I ended up pregnant as a result. The police refused to press charges. I had a town that didn't, I was living at the time in a very small village back in Wisconsin, born and raised there. And they had a really hard time understanding if the police didn't believe me, why should they?
Mhm.
So the level of betrayal that happened back when I was 17 was really deep and multifaceted. And I decided to keep my son. I actually birthed him, kept him. There's a lot in the book about that because the social services tried to adopt him out when I didn't even know it, and so I really had to then fight for my child as well. He's my oldest son today, and just a remarkable kid. So I really had to do a lot of, even back then at 17, a lot of deep diving into my voice and being heard when nobody would listen. Uh,
Mhm.
I ended up marrying who was my best friend. I met this man in college. I literally fell in love with him overnight. He was literally my best friend, and we ended up getting married. We were married for 17 years, and I found out Thanksgiving Eve of 2013 that he had been betraying me for 14 of our years of marriage, and he was betraying me with men. So
Mhm.
he had multiple addictions that I found out about. He literally was leading a double life. And so all of what had happened, this happened at the age of 40. I'm now 47. What happened during that time was really triggering because then it brought up a lot of my past trauma from when I was 17 that I still hadn't resolved, but didn't realize that I hadn't resolved. What was interesting about that time is I also, at that same time, used everything that I had learned from the age of 17, now in my 40s, that many years later, to overcome and to work through my recovery, my trauma recovery through the age of 42. Well, I'm still in recovery. I mean, everybody is. Like
Mhm.
when you're on this journey, it doesn't stop. It's not like, oh, I'm done, I'm healed. No, it's something I work on every day. And so I really, through that process, realized that I had something here that needed to get put into the world. Because what's interesting about it is at the age of 17, when that had happened, I really felt alone. I felt so alone. Nobody would hear me. Nobody could hear me. Nobody could understand me. And then at the age of 18, I had this hit. I call it like a God given hit that at some day I was going to write a book. And I literally heard the voice in my head say, keep doing what you're doing, stay strong. Someday your story will get out there so others don't feel alone like you do right now. Now, when I could never understand why this book never got written and what was the content. And then when all of this happened at 40, I understood, oh, I get it. My story hadn't been, it was not completed. Like I still had to live through a lot more in order for this book to get out there. And so then at the age of, 41, 42, I started thinking, okay, now I need to be able to start telling my story and to get it out there. So then I started my book proposal and I ended up, working on this book, which manifested into this creation today. The way that the nature healing came in was because when I was in recovery from my husband, from that trauma, and literally that trauma was deep, I was in deep, deep PTSD. I ended up taking my paddleboard and going out to the ocean. And that was my place of really diving into who I am and recovering in a way that, was so unconventional. I would paddle with whales and dolphins and just sit out there 4 miles offshore and do a lot of my own clarity thinking and really processing and crying and, then at the same time laughing and filling my cup with joy because I'm sitting out here with these, amazing creatures. And it was there. And it was also in the mountains. I would go into the mountains and I would just hike trails and climb peaks and stand on the summit and realize that the perspective of life is so different from every angle. And
Mm-hmm.
so that whole through like recovery in nature, and then also slowly coming into the space of forgiveness and realizing that the depth of my forgiveness is why I also keep recovering from these deep traumas. Right. And so putting the two together is how I ended up writing this book. And that's how the content came to be in a nutshell. There's a lot more, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode on just your life experiences and what that process was like and all of that. But I want to focus more on the content in the book, because like there is so much in this book. So like when I first started flipping through it, I'm like, oh wow, my gosh, like we're at page, I don't even know, and we're still in the preface. So I'm like, introduction and preface. As I started reading, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got like a whole book just within the introduction and the preface. There's like it's like golden nugget after golden nugget. So
Yay, I'm
before
glad you love it. That's so
I
exciting.
did. I haven't done it yet as my own work yet. I'm
Right.
going to, but I love it because you've got the deep, kind of philosophical and spiritual and analyzing life components to it. You weave in your own personal story, which then I just am a big believer in sharing our stories for our own healing, but also so that other people feel less alone.
Right.
But then you also have these very like practical exercises and approaches and meditations. So it's just, I don't know, it's a great combination of material. So I want to, like, I was thinking earlier today, I'm like, I wonder if I could convince like two of my friends who I know would love this book that we go on like a week vacation and we all just like work through the book together, like
Okay,
somewhere out
that's
in
why
nature.
I
Like,
did it. Yes, no, really, that's why I did it. I was actually standing on a trail, gosh, 2 years ago, and I saw this girl pull out this book out of her pack. We were up at Precipice Lake, and I write about that. And I was like, that's what my book is going to do someday. It is the book that people are going to take on their journey, and they're going to pull it out, and they're going to work through it, and they're going to use it. But that's also why I put so much spiritual science, personal story into it, because it also has to all interweave, right? Like that's what makes it what it is.
yes, yes, because, and sometimes, and I find this with myself and my own work, the spiritual and the higher level stuff sounds all like great and like, oh, accept life as it comes and everything is done for us. But then, like, you actually have to live through days
Yeah.
and like they can be tough. And so it's like, it's all great in the spiritual world, but like we're living on earth. So
Right.
kind of finding the intersection there can be difficult.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Because I completely hear you on that.
Yeah.
You can't just
Okay.
totally surrender without doing the work and the steps along the way as well, which is why exactly.
Yeah, exactly. If I just totally surrendered, I'd just lay down on my couch right now. And then like
Wouldn't that be
that,
great?
yeah, that'd be ideal. But no, I have to interact with life and people, and then they trigger me and I've got to work through all that. But that is the journey.
Mhm.
But one thing I want to touch on first, just because, and you talk about this in the beginning, is we tend to compare our experiences to what other people have been through, either from the lens of like kind of not validating our own pain or what we've been through, like looking, oh, she's had it worse, like who am I to complain? Or we look at it through the lens of why we can't overcome something because, well, it's so much harder for me because of that, whatever reason. And so that like comparison of what we've been through, because like I could sit here and be like, okay, I've been through some difficult stuff, but I could say it's nothing compared to what you've been through. And so, like, talk a little bit about how we get out of that mindset and instead, like, validate our pain. Because I think this is a book everyone can benefit from, no matter what their quote unquote trauma looks like. If it was big, obvious trauma, or if it was more just like the little t traumas that people talk about, like, there's no value in assuming because they haven't been through something like you've been through that this type of work isn't beneficial.
Right. Well, first of all, I hope nobody does have to go through what I went through. And because it was a lot. And also at that same time, I think that the worst thing that we can do is compare ourselves to other people or compare our journeys to other people. Because in doing that, we're also then judging, right? And the judgment of yourself and the judgment of others will hold you back. And so I look at everybody's journey, including my ex-husband's, as wow, I can't imagine having to walk through what he went through. Right. And so there's
Mhm.
so many times where we look at one another and we say, well, exactly like you said, like, well, if only that, if only my life was like hers, or at least my life isn't like that, or at least. And so by honoring our journey, which is why I put that section in there, we also can take responsibility and ownership for what we have, because this is your life, right? And there's
Mhm.
nobody else that you need to compare it to. My kids, I tell them, don't ever compare yourself to one another, because ultimately we are all human beings walking in a body with a heart and a soul that picked us. And so this is what you're supposed to be doing during this journey. You're not supposed to be comparing, quote unquote, to try and make yourself be somebody else. All we want to do is to be ourselves and to learn from our experiences that we are also handed. So I always talk about honor what you have. It's kind of like I had a lot of people say to me, oh, well, it must have been easier for you because at least he was with men. And I'm like, wait, what? Why would
Yeah, like,
it was
why is
the
that
most
easier?
ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And so it's almost like you're making excuses for something that happened, or telling you should feel one way or another, when in reality, all that's doing is then shaming who we are. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? So it's really about honoring who we are through this process.
Yeah, and I think also like that comparison game that we play, and you just said this word, like it can be like an excuse not to go into our own pain.
Yeah.
And so like you have this quote, I have like several of quotes from your book in front of me because I just thought they were great, but like we must go deep within ourselves and sit with who we are in order to climb out of our pain and transform. And that's something that is just really hard for people to do. So I think it like our first defense mechanism is that comparison, like, oh, well, I can't ever get through this, or my life isn't that bad because I'm comparing it to other people. But all of that is just avoiding actually
Right.
going into whatever pain we're feeling.
Well, and it holds us from our best life, quite frankly,
Hmm.
which we are here to do. We are here to live the best life that we can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which
Yes. Yes,
Which, well, then
absolutely.
I get tripped up on that phrase best life, because kind of to what you said earlier, like we never reach best. Like it's a
Right.
constant journey and learning and unfolding and healing. And so like for me, like the word best then like puts the ceiling that I know I'm actually never going to reach.
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah. And I don't mean it like that at all. It's more so of when I'm saying best, like the most amazing, deep, adventurous, magical life that we can possibly reach to at any time. I think that we definitely do put caps on ourselves. And I know that for myself. Ever since I've been divorced, the fact that now I have no longer put limitations on my happiness. And so I'm happier than I've ever been. And I continue to be every day, because I'm not like, oh, I'm just so happy, I'm going to stop there.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So another, like, I think really incredible principle that you talk about very early on in the book, which I think is, I believe wholeheartedly, but I think can be really difficult to remember during the day to day, just in general. But then also, if you go through big, difficult things, is that life is happening
Mm.
for you, not against you. And that it's actually always bringing you the lessons that you need. How and like at what point did you start to come to that realization?
Well, so I actually started having that realization when I was 17. And
Oh,
that
wow.
was, yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, that was deep back then. When I had so many people that were fighting me during that time and questioning me, I had to believe in something that was very different than most people believed in, especially back in 1991, which was, okay, this is happening. So if this is happening for me, then what am I supposed to do with it? And so I started back then having this little nugget of learning. And then when I turned 40, that was hard because it was a hard lesson even for me then because it was just so traumatic. It was so traumatic having something so deep happen to me where my best friend did this, right? And so I knew at that same time that if I survived and thrived from what happened to me at 17, that there was something bigger and deeper and more learning for me in this. So that's when I really started going, okay, what is happening here and what is this about? Why was this handed to me not as a, wow, like I did something wrong and so I'm this must have happened, but more so almost like it was a gift of, okay, so you are going to learn from this. What is it that you're going to learn from this and how are you going to use this to help other people? And I know that's a really hard thing for a lot of people to understand. I do talk though, even in the documentary that we're working on. I say, like, I thank my husband, my former husband, for what he did. And I say, I wish that you could have done this a lot, that you could have come to this realization a lot earlier. However, thank you for giving me such a gift of learning that I never would have had otherwise. Again, I would never have asked for it because it really was hard to go through. I never want to experience that again. And it's what you do with it then that can alter it from something that happened to you to something that happened for you.
I love that. And I totally agree with that. I try and remember that on a daily basis. But I think one of the barriers to kind of staying in that mindset is that I don't know, it's almost like the norm, or I don't know if it's just the way society works or says that we should work, but kind of this concept that you talk about, like judging forgiveness, that
Mhm.
we see it as like a weakness or like letting someone off the hook, whereas we find more power in like being angry or like holding a grudge.
You nailed on two things that I was just thinking, which was exactly or feeling into, which is exactly so many times we put our anger or we put our power into the things that are very toxic, which is anger, resentment. I'm going to hold you in this space because what you did was wrong. And that's where also forgiveness comes into because when you step into that place of forgiveness, there is so much strength in handing your pain back to the person that hurt you most and to then bring in the freedom and peace that ultimately you are here to live in. And so many times we mistake that because here's where it comes from. Society teaches us that you are never to forget, or that you are, if you're going to forgive, that then it is to forget that something happened to you, right? They want to make sure that the person who hurt you most remembers that they hurt you, which is interesting because I don't forget and I don't condone what happened to me. Okay. There is no way that I'm going to pardon this man and say, what you did, that I'm just going to sit there and say, what you did is okay. I'm looking at him and saying, what you did is wrong. What I'm not going to do is to hold on to the pain that you handed to me. What I am going to do is learn from it because there's responsibilities that I have in my marriage, many, many, many that I talk about in that book. I'm very open about that. And I'm also very clear that he is again on his own journey. And
Mm-hmm.
it really is unfortunate that he couldn't have come to me a lot sooner. But that's not my journey. That's his. Right. And we also had a journey together, which then was altered. So there's this whole play in this, and that, we as society really tend to want to hold on to the things that actually are hurting us. They're not helping us. It's not helping us to hold on to all of that pain and that anger. It's actually hurting us. And so I'm hoping that people that go through this type of thing can look at it like, okay, if I can work through these steps, like the steps that are in my book, if I can work through these steps and really understand and deepen the learning for me, I can then hand back the pain to those people that hurt me. If it's even myself, if I've hurt myself or if it's somebody that did hurt me, or if it's society, if it's the police, whatever it is, and to then step into the ultimate, gift, which is being free from all of that pain. It's a beautiful process and it's one hard for people to understand sometimes too.
Yeah, and it's I love it. I totally like agree with that. And it's such a big point to realize, okay, not forgiving this person, holding on the pain, I'm just hurting myself. Like I'm choosing to live in this state of like negativity and like, and difficult emotions and all of that because I feel like I have to for some reason or whatever our reasoning is. And I wonder sometimes, like, is our inability to forgive because on some level, like the pain that somebody causes us. So let's say if when I did realize this while looking through the book that maybe I had a trauma in my teenage years, nothing like yours, but something that I was betrayed, and recognizing, okay, so that if I attach meaning to that, and
Mhm.
that's part of the pain. Like this person did this because some negative statement about me and my own self-worth. Do we then are we unable to forgive because we actually believe that belief, like that negative belief about ourselves? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think a lot of times we do. I mean, let me tell you, when this happened to me at 40, I went back and I was so triggered back to 17. First of all, when he said that to me, when he literally like, disclosed everything to me, the first thing I said to him was, I want a divorce and I will forgive you someday. And to this day, I am like, okay, my powerful 17-year-old self with that subconscious, person within me, I don't even know where that came from. And it was one of those things where I knew that I had to eventually go back to that. However, in answer to your question, what's really interesting is it also made me realize how much I had not healed from. And I had
Mm-hmm.
serious self-worth issues, and I had some serious intimacy issues, and I had some serious self-love issues. Even though I loved myself so much, there was still some things that I had not worked through because of what had happened to me. Um, well, because it was my safety mechanism. I had to put barriers up and walls in order to protect. And a lot of times when we do that, we also hold on to the stories. And we then also, we still sit in even more self worth and self love issues because of it. And so I think it's one of those processes that we have to also look back at, even from when we're little kids, and say, okay, where is this stemming from? I always do that with my clients. I say, well, where is this stemming from? Go all the way back because we do hold on to stories, and other
Mm-hmm.
people's stories become our own, and then we make stories from those about ourselves and our life and who we are, and we hold on to those.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's something I've realized and have been working through. Like when something triggers me, big or small, but I get upset about something. If I really think about it, it's because it's upsetting me because I believe some story I'm attaching to it, which stems from who knows where. And then I'm like, okay, if I just choose not to believe this story anymore, then I'm not going to be triggered anymore and everything's going to be fine. That's a very simplistic way of viewing it. It's by no means as easy as recognizing that. But I think a lot of times it is coming back to like our own beliefs about ourselves. And you talk about that. That is one of the steps in the book of like the self-worth and self-love. But that's where I think like this work gets super deep, like self-love and self-worth. It's more than just, giving yourself a spa day and that kind of stuff. Like it's really going deep.
And it's so beautiful. That's what's just amazing to me. And I think that so many people have a hard time with it also because they think it's going to get so deep and so messy. And I'm going to bring up all these old wounds and, let's just keep it under the carpet because why go there? And I got to tell you, healing does not have to suck. I think that we put this thought processes on it like it's going to be so hard and messy that it's just really going to be ugh. And I look at it like for me, it's been the most amazing, literally magical journey of discovery of who I am. And I really want to take the shame off that. I would love for people to take the shame off traumas and the shame off of what it is to heal because we can also have fun doing it. It's not
Hmm.
doesn't always have to be that hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good reminder. Thank you. Sometimes I'm able to like bring myself up a little bit and be like, all right, Casey, this is a journey. Like, this is fun. It's okay. It's all good stuff. And then other times I get stuck in it and I'm like, oh, this is so difficult. Um, Okay, I want to just briefly go through like the different steps in the book and not get into the weeds with any of them, but just kind of touch on the bigger picture concepts in them, because I love how you categorized all of this. So step one, you talk about like setting your intention and surrender.
Mhm.
And I love both of that, because I think that concept of like, because I think sometimes we can get so stuck in, oh, I've got to have all these plans and all these goals and all these milestones and like plan out my life and this is what it's going to look like, and then we're like attached to that, and we think we are quote unquote determined and working hard and all these other attributes we think are good things to stick to that plan, instead of setting maybe a higher level intention
Right.
and then being more open to like what life has to bring to us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I used to be a goal setter, by the way, and I still am. I mean, I have yearly goals that I have set for myself, and but the difference is that when you're setting an intention, and I do this for every day, and I was doing this on my healing journey as well. Before I would go out onto the water with my paddleboard, I would say, okay, what is it that what is my intention for doing this? Why am I doing this? What is it that I'm here for? Because when you're setting an intention, you then literally you put understanding and words to what it is that you're doing, and it allows you to be more thoughtful and mindful of why you're there. And so I think it's a really really important piece to the healing journey, especially into forgiveness, because you have to know why you're doing stuff. And I do this with the work that I do with my clients today. Before we go into the Grand Canyon, I always say, what's your intention for being here? You could just go climb a peak and, just do it. But why are you here? And it also gets
Mm-hmm.
back to literally, why are we as humans? Why am I here?
Mm. Yeah, I think that it also helps like keep us out of just total reactionary go 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 without thinking mode, which is kind of how life is structured right now. And
Yeah.
it's like if we take that moment, because I've started to do it sometimes before conversations, just that little pause and like remind myself of like my intention with the conversation, or my intention to stay calm or not reactionary if I'm going into a conversation that I know might be like triggering, and just taking that moment with yourself. Then there's also like a little bit of accountability with yourself, because
Mhm.
like you've said, this is what I'm going to do. You've taken the moment to think about it, and that I think creates like even just a little bit of space for you to not be like super reactionary in conversations, or just like go 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 constantly throughout life.
Yeah. And, with goals, I mean, goals, it's like you're looking at that destination, you're saying, that's what I'm going to get to. But when you're setting an intention, you're also allowing the possibilities of life to open up to you. So that's why it's also really important, because a healing journey is not a straight line, right?
Mm,
Life is actually not a straight line.
yep.
I have no idea where it's going to take you. I had no idea it was going to take me here. And so by setting an intention and also surrendering to what is possible, you're allowing yourself to open up to all of the magic along the way in your journey.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so then in step two, you've got this great like values exercise. And step two, you're kind of looking at like asking, or what you just said, like who am I?
Who am I?
And what I love is like, this is how I categorize it in my brain. Like the values is kind of like this outward facing definition of who we are, like how we want to show up in the world and what's important to us. But then you start talking about like the inner warrior, and that's almost like this switch around of being like all the true value is just already within. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I love that, because it's like we can get stuck on these more like external facing type definitions of who we are, how we want to live life. But that reminder that we've got something like so much bigger and more powerful within us of like who we truly are.
Yeah. Yeah, when I started doing this work, that was the values piece was one of the most, I think, it just it just shook me. It knocked me to my knees, to be honest with you. I was on the ground crying when I was doing the values work with some classmates of mine. And the reason why is because I didn't even know what my values were. I mean, I was in a marriage for so long, and my values and who I was became so intertwined with him that I lost a part of me and I didn't even know it. And so when I was doing this work and realizing, oh my gosh, my value of honesty was stepped on, so it was crushed. my value of communication, my value of truth, my value of love, of marriage. And so doing that values work, I tell people don't like you have to take it seriously because
Mm-hmm.
it really is so important to know. I call it like the foundation and building blocks of who you are. And your values shift, right? Like you get married, your values shift. Things happen in your life, you steer from them. It's also really important to know what they are. And that also goes into then the inner warrior, which I also consider to be my inner compass. And that is that the inner warrior is that person within you who really you turn to, you can look at and say, okay, I need that extra power or that extra empowerment to get me through this, to be heard or to be seen or just to walk the journey. And it's really powerful when you figure out where is that inner warrior coming from and who is she or he.
Mm-hmm.
I I've used it. I've tapped into this more times than you can ever imagine. Ever imagine. And I'm telling you, it is so good. It is so good.
All right, little sidebar question, because I know you mentioned in the book that you're like or what I would call as well, like a recovering Catholic. Were you, were you spiritual? Like, at what point did you really connect with your spirituality?
All right. Shall I tell you a story that I've never talked about?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I will tell you a story I've never talked about. So I, even as a little girl, was experiencing things in my life that didn't make sense. Like, I would put down my grandmother's ring. My mom gave me my grandmother's ring, and I wasn't supposed to lose it. I was supposed to wear this all the time, and I sat it down, and then it disappeared. And I came back, and it was gone. I mean, it had like magically gone away. And I came back after I had talked to my grandmother of, I'm so sorry, I lost this ring, and it was right where it was when I had looked there, and it's where I placed it, and all of a sudden it disappeared, and now it's back again. And I started having these experiences. I've never talked about that, by the way. I
Okay, hold on. That is so crazy. I have goosebumps. So I have a similar, like eerily similar story, except it was a necklace that my grandmother had given me, like a crucifix cross necklace. And I was outside playing, and I came in and put it on the kitchen counter. I remember this exactly. Went back outside and played, came back, and it was just gone.
Mhm.
And I mean, I looked everywhere for it. Finally, like months later, whatever, got mustered up the courage to tell my grandmother that I had lost it. Actually, I didn't have the courage to tell her. I wrote her a letter that I had my mother like deliver to her when she was in town for Christmas or something. And I prayed and prayed and prayed. And then at some point I found it. It wasn't back in the same location, but I did find it in a super random, like there was no way that would have ever happened, like
Yeah.
location.
I have had so many of those things where exactly. And isn't it just like you're sitting there going, okay, am I crazy? Because I was little. I don't even remember how old I was. I was a really little girl. How old were you when this happened?
Oh, I was, yeah. I mean, I was a child.
Yep. And so then you're thinking, okay, am I just nuts? As a kid, I mean, I wasn't going to go and talk to my mom about it or my dad or anybody. I was like, okay, maybe that was just that was weird. And I started having these when I was little. And throughout my life, well, like my intuition, I talk about this in my book, like my intuition was spot on many, many times with even my husband. I would get these hits from above of, telling me like, your husband's gay. And I would like fall on the ground crying. Okay. Like, what is that? And where is his voice coming from? And then I would go and have the conversation with him, and I listened to him instead of myself. That's my intuition. That's my spiritual gift. And so I was having these, but I didn't fully understand or embrace it until probably the last, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years, about the last 5 years is when I really started going, okay, I can talk about this. And if people think I'm crazy, I don't really care because I know that I'm not the only one having these things happen to me, clearly, because it happened to you. Right. And so I think that that also goes to say, like, we are so connected. We are connected with
Hmm.
those people above us. We are connected with those who have passed. I have had so many experiences with those who have passed that I could write a book in itself. And it's so important to understand too that, this world, we're not in this alone. If we're connected to nature, we're connected to the dolphins and the whales. I mean, I've looked in the eyes of dolphins and whales, and now I have not talked to a dolphin, or well, I have, but I don't know what I'm saying back. I've literally talked to dolphins and whales, to be honest with you, locked eyes with them. And I just know that they're with me. Their presence is with me. I don't need to hear them. I just know that their presence is with me. And it's a beautiful state to be in because, again, then you realize, like, I'm not alone. I'm here for a reason. There is something so much larger than me. And I'm here in it for a reason. Um, yeah, I mean, it's really, and it's really cool. I don't know what else to say, but it's really cool.
It is. And it's one of those things I sometimes lose sight of just in like the hustle and bustle of life. And then I try and I think that's really a lot of the power of taking these quiet moments, especially in nature, because it's that reconnection point. It's that remembrance of, because you can feel it, like you can feel it on a certain level, like, oh, everything is connected. If you start to pay attention to nature and how it all works in harmony, and it's all like this perfect system, and like we're part of that. Like we're part of this bigger system. And I don't know, we've lost sight of that, in a lot of us have, in the way that we live our lives, which is a shame. And then I think that's just contributing to things like as big as, depression, anxiety, and all the I guess effects of, what do you call it, the nature deficit disorder. But
Yeah.
then also like just that disconnection from our intuition and not listening to ourselves, because we haven't like fostered that connection. We haven't like worked on that relationship.
I wish I had like an entire day to talk to you about this because honestly, it would blow your mind how many times that I've had experiences with people, and it's so beautiful to witness people tapping into that again when
Hmm.
they're in nature. Um, can I get a little scientific with you for just a
Yeah.
second? Okay, so because I do find this to be very interesting as well, and you know, part of the reason why that is also we live in four walls. We are sitting at computer screens all day. Well, especially now during COVID, even our kids are. We go work out in four walls. We drive in four walls. I mean, we shop in four walls. We don't garden anymore, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of people do, but where I'm at, we don't. Um, and it's really the interesting thing about it is that our frontal lobe is always on. And that's the lobe of task mastering and checking off the list and making sure that we get schedules right. And are my kids involved in this and that and another thing? And we got to do better, better, more, more. And so how do you slow down? Right. And so being able to then step out of the walls and step out of our head and go into nature, that's where we do connect. And that's why we connect, is because our frontal lobe is allowed to rest, and the cerebellum part of our brain, which is the back part of our brain, that's where clarity lives, creativity, and that's allowed to rise. And so that's where we feel awe and wonder, and awe and wonder, that those are the emotions that help us to lessen our PTSD and our anxiety and our depression. So it really truly does work on a scientific level, which is why I brought that scientific piece into the preface, because people also, we're human, like we want to understand why stuff works.
Yeah.
I'm
No, I love that you included that brain part in the beginning of the book, because I can get kind of nerdy with that kind of stuff. And the same thing, like you just said, we want to understand the whys and the hows. And I think that helps get us a little bit more bought in. And so, like you just said, like that nature has that awe. And that's what I was just thinking of. It's like dedicating the time to just get outside the four walls is hard enough as it is for us. But then when we're out there, we still have to then try and get outside of our heads, which is not easy. Anyone who's ever tried to meditate knows it's not easy. But like getting outside in nature, it's like there'll be those awe moments. Like it happens to me all the time when I walk outside early in the morning and I see the moon. There's something about the moon that I
Yes,
just
not a
find like
moon.
very, yeah, like I'll go, oh, and I like, then I talk to the moon. So I'm right there with you with talking to
You and
stuff.
I are actually talking to each other. You realize that, right? Because like you're talking to the moon and I'm talking to the moon and we're really talking to each other.
For sure. But like this morning, I took a moment and sat outside and I just saw this little like ant crawling on this aloe plant I have. And I was kind of just watching it for a minute. That kind of stuff, like you said, rests the rest of our brain, like gives us that minute of like, which is so important. It's like we recognize that our bodies need to sleep, yet we don't recognize that like our brain needs to
The
rest.
rest. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, I could talk about the brain all day. Okay, so then next you get into like embracing self-worth and self-love, and we've talked about this a little bit, but um, this is when we're dealing with our inner critic, which we all know and have, and I'm sure we're all having conversations with. At least everyone listening to this podcast is. But what I found so interesting is you give this great exercise of like defining our self-worth in terms of what it's not,
Yes.
which I found very interesting. Is that like a trick to get us to realize our self-worth it just is, like it's just in us, like there's no way to define it because like it just is.
It just is, because so many of us, we define our self worth based on the things that we own and not based on the internal piece of who we are. And so our
Hmm.
self worth is in us. It's not external. It's not attached to the walls that we are living in, or the car that we drive, or how much money we have in the bank, or the number of friends, or the number of followers. Um,
Or like our relationship status, like the different roles
exactly.
that we play, whether or not we're a parent, like all of that.
Yeah. And so that's why when I got divorced, I told my kids we're stripping down to nothing, and we literally did. We sold our 4,200 square foot house. We sold 95% of our stuff or gave it away, and we moved into 800 square feet directly across the street. By the way, and for me, it was this realization of, you know what, this is ridiculous. We are attaching to things that don't even have meaning to us, and so when we're doing that, we also are actually negating the self-worth that we have in us, right?
Hmm.
We're not valuing that. And so it's really important for people to get back to, and I'm not saying that driving a great car isn't awesome. Trust me, it is. And living in a big house would be great. However, I want to know, I want to make sure that my kids and I got back down to our own really determining what our self-worth is before we then step out and choose different things that we want to bring into our life.
Right. Yeah, like it's not, like you said, it's not that there's anything bad about owning nice things or how much money you have, because I think on the flip side then we can get to where we then have like a I don't know, like a negative relationship with these things, and then that's not helpful. But it's more that it's not defining who you are. So I think again it comes back to that, the realization that we are, I don't know, we're bigger than we realize we are, like that
Oh,
inner warrior. Yeah, that's
yes.
here, like we chose this life, we're here to learn, like everything's happening in our favor. It's hard to see it in the moment, but like there's big things ahead. We can't see it in our little human body, but like just
Right.
trusting that like bigger concept.
Yes, yes, yes. People tend to forget how amazing that they are, and how their intuition is so spot on when they just listen and they slow down and they allow themselves to just be. And worthiness is with that. Worthiness is with that. And, I had to do a lot of work. This is the one step that I still work on. I mean, I work on all of them. But that is the one that I'm still working on so deeply because of everything that happened to me. And it's been intense because let me tell you, receiving can be hard, right?
Hmm.
So, and talking about even receiving yourself can be very hard, and feeding that self worth can be very hard. And so I really, yeah. So when I was writing that, and it was like, let's strip down to what does not determine it before we actually step into what does.
So something you just said, like really like hit deep about like receiving is hard. And one of the questions I have written down here in my notes for you is, because I experienced this literally earlier this day. I will sometimes have these moments, very fleeting, where you feel like just happiness, joy, inspiration, love. It's like this like visceral, amazing feeling. But then I can't, it's like hard for me to even sit in that. I'm kind of like, oh, look, that's nice. Okay, like get back like to the to do. So,
Hmm.
like, are we so attached to the pain that we lose our ability, or we forget what it's like to feel good and to really like let that in and relish it, rather than be like, oh wow, like look at that strange feeling, I gotta now get back to writing or whatever I was doing.
Right. Well, I always say people, especially when you've lived through difficulties, become comfortable with the uncomfortable. So that's really hard for them to step into the comfortable. Did you follow
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's like the uncomfortable, what should be the uncomfortable, the pain and stuff, becomes the norm, the
Right.
comfortable. And so then, yeah, I totally followed.
Yeah,
And that's
a
one of
lot of
the
people
things
are
you
like,
talk about. Yeah.
what? And so it's sometimes weird to, it's kind of like for the people that are constantly in the doing, it's weird for them to not do anything because they're just so accustomed to having to do everything. And that's interesting you bring this up because I sent a text message to somebody, I don't know, I guess you could call him a friend colleague today. And I said something that was very, very kind. And he brushed it off and was like, well, but other people too. And I literally one word back and I said, just receive. I said,
Yeah.
the word back that I sent was receive. And he responded with, thank you. Because this is something that so many of us forget to do. We are so on to that next step, right? And so being able to just simply sit, and I'm gonna give you a little tool to do. This is what I do. When I'm feeling that ultimate peace moment or that ultimate happiness or that ultimate joy, I will sit, close my eyes, put my hands over my heart and receive it. Because
Mm.
when you're feeling your heartbeat and when you're able to realize like your heart's there for you. I don't have your heart. You don't have my heart. This is my heart. That's a pretty big deal when you think about that, right? And just feel your heartbeat and allow yourself to receive the happiness and the joy and the goodness that comes with it. It's pretty phenomenal. And it allows you then to even sit in it even longer the next time. So it's something that it's a learning, it's something that you learn to do. You're rewiring your brain, again, your brain, when you're actually dropping into your heart and allowing yourself to sit with the goodness.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna try that, because I will, and I don't know what the blockage is, but it's like I think I don't have the right to just stop and enjoy it. Like I got more stuff to do, go, go, go. Or if it is just like what you said, that getting comfortable with what should be comfortable but became uncomfortable because we were so comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Mhm. Well, and then we resist it. And the more that we resist it, the easier it is to resist it. It's kind of like, when you resist something once and you're like, okay, it's just, you just become accustomed to resisting something because that's your pattern of behavior. And so if you can flip it and say, my pattern of behavior has now become sitting with happiness and allowing
Mm.
myself to just be with the goodness that's given to me. Because what a gift. Don't deny yourself
Yeah.
an amazing gift that's literally been handed to you. Don't turn it away, you know?
Yeah. That's going to be my new mantra. Just receive.
Just receive. That was my mantra for an entire year.
Yeah. I usually do like yearly mantras too. I don't want to wait until 2021 to do it. I'm just going to
Start it
implement it now. Just receive.
now. It's right now. I love it. I love that I was
Yeah.
honest with you, and that became your mantra. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I love
Love
it.
it.
That's a great
Can
one.
we try it? Can we try it for a second? Can we just
Okay. Oh God. Okay.
look at her? She's uncomfortable already.
You can like tell I am. I totally am. I just started sweating. Okay.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay. You are an amazing, bright, brilliant, beautiful woman here to grace your presence and share your wisdom with the world.
Okay. I'm trying to receive that. It is weird because you can like feel it like I mean, I have like a visceral feeling of, it's not like uncomfortable. It's just like something like around my heart that's like
Just let it
not letting it in.
just let it sink in. Just breathe into it. And when you're breathing into it, let it come from the deepest part from within you. Let it come from the like the deepest part, not from your chest, but from all the way down. What I tell people is let actually the roots of the trees come up. Let your trees, the tree roots actually breathe with you and just let it sink into your heart.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy, the tree roots. Okay. Oh, that was good. I do feel
Mhm.
better.
Yeah.
And you have all the meditations that you have in the book on audio on your website, right? Did I read that
Yeah.
somewhere?
They will be up.
Okay.
Will be up when the book releases. Yeah. They will be up.
Okay. All right. So we're not going to go through the rest of the steps. People have to buy the book to do those. But I have two more questions that I want to ask you about because I'm curious. So, you know, when we talked about forgiveness earlier in the conversation, you mentioned, you know, that it's kind of just like handing the pain back to like the person maybe that hurt you or betrayed you. But when it comes to forgiving ourselves, like that's like a different process because
Yeah. Yeah. hmm
yeah. So
Going,
like then are
sorry.
we like letting the pain go because it's just like we to forgive ourselves, I think is like a whole other level of forgiveness. Um, because can we continue to recognize that like something was wrong, or are we supposed to view it in a more positive light?
So when I wrote the book, I do it in three steps: forgiveness for self, forgiveness for others, and forgiveness for the world. And the reason why I started with forgiveness for self is because I believe, and especially through my own healing journey, that everything starts with self.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have to learn to love ourselves so deeply before we can step into, or when we can step into, then a love with somebody else. The worthiness piece, it's everything. And I say this over and over and over again. The most important relationship that you can have in life is the one with yourself.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir. That's the whole point of this podcast.
Yep, exactly. Right. There you go. And so I have said that's actually why I started with forgiveness for self. It also can be really hard because there were many things that I've had to actually look back on and understand my patterns of behavior and my patterns of in life that got me to where I am today. I had to forgive myself immensely for all of the times that I didn't listen to me and I listened to, what my husband was telling me. Because had I have listened to me, I in a way betrayed myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because had I listened to that inner voice, that intuition that was God given, whatever you want to call it, um, I would have left so much longer, so much earlier. And so it was a process for me of realizing that, yeah, forgiveness for self can be really hard. And also it's the most important because
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to step away from yourself. Now, it's more about learning from what happened and taking responsibility for the things that got you there. Because when you're doing that, you're also letting go of the pain that you've been holding on to for yourself. It's like self-inflicted pain that you can now say, okay, I'm good. I learned from that and I can now let this go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like finding the lesson in it and the growth from it is then that's like, yeah, earning the right to let it go because you've turned it into a positive.
Right.
You've
Right.
flipped it. Okay, do you believe that life and especially relationships are always mirrors? Like, do you think that you were betraying yourself by not listening to yourself, and the way that manifested in life was your husband betraying you?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. That is a really good question.
Because I found that a lot of times if I look hard enough, I can usually find
Hmm.
where something that I thought happened to me was a mirror of what I actually had going on inside me, like on some level.
So here's how I look at it with my, at some level, absolutely, because I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective, though, within my own life, was that I didn't realize how many intimacy issues I had, um, and how badly I was hurting from having my body used, and from back in 17. And I had never healed from that. And
Hmm.
so it made, when I sat there, I think it was one of my first sessions with my coach or therapist that I had back then. Um, and I was like, it's so crazy because I can see it plain as day now. And for me, it was also, that was a huge part of my forgiveness for self, because I learned, right? I learned what got me there. And I also understood that for me, it was that mirror of, oh, I married my best friend. He really was my best friend. I loved him up and down, in and out. However, he was not the man that could ultimately fulfill me in a relationship. And I didn't know that. And so he fed a part of me, but he couldn't be there with me in a way that I needed him to be. Um, And so, yeah, I guess you could say that in a way, I betrayed myself, but didn't realize that that's what was also happening. Because I was
Hmm.
really young too. Understand, I got married at 21. I
Oh,
was
wow. Yeah.
really young, and fresh out of college, and I was entering my teaching career, and there was a lot happening. And so, and it was a different time. It was just also a different time. And it was painful because then I had to look at stuff that I had already had to deal with, so much betrayal. And so, having to look at that too. Oof. That's why I always say, like, things happen in our life at certain times, and we don't know why they happen when they happen. And I know that for my own life, I can look back and say, wow, okay, it makes sense. It just makes sense
Hmm.
how it happened that way.
So would you say where are you right now in your process of forgiving yourself? Like, are you good and you've been able to move
Oh,
on to
yeah.
forgiving others, or do you think forgiving ourselves is a constant journey as well?
Well, so here's the thing, is that I've absolutely forgiven myself, 100%. I've also forgiven my husband, my former husband. Um, we're co-parents today. We're going to start doing business together mid 2021, which is just
Oh.
like, what? I know. It's kind of shocking for a lot of people. There's some things that we're going to be working on together because I know what his gifts are and I know what mine are. And I also have, I've even forgiven the guy who raped me at 17. I've never talked to him about it, but if he was sitting next to me, I 100% would. I've done it inwardly, forgiven him. And I've forgiven the police, and I've forgiven, those people who hurt me. And there's a list that's a laundry list long, but um, it's also something, this is where I want to be very clear on something. It's something I work on every single day, because you cannot take forgiveness and just put it on a shelf. It's something that we are, every single day making the conscious decision, the conscious choice to wake up knowing that I may be triggered, but it doesn't set me back. Because trust me, my ex-husband triggers me. And I also know, and we talk about this. Like, he and I we have a very, like, loving, open communication about where he triggers me and where I also trigger him. And it's important to know that we have kids that we're still co-parenting, and will be for the rest of our life. And so, you know, it's something that I literally work on every single day, because I don't want to live any other way. I mean, this is too amazing.
Yeah, and I think it goes hand in hand with self-worth and self-love. That, I mean, we're gonna,
Hmm.
life is continuing to go on. So we're gonna all do things today, tomorrow, whatever, that we can then turn that as evidence into some negative story we used to believe, and or we can continue to love ourselves, to forgive ourselves, to find worth and value in ourselves. And so I think it's definitely an ongoing process, but that's amazing that you've overcome what you have overcome. I mean, it's beyond an inspiring story, like for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. It was it was hard. It was hard getting to this place, I have to tell you. And I don't sit there and tell people everything is so easy, because it's not. I will tell you though, like I've said, I've had so much fun doing it as well. I mean, there's so much to be learned, and I mean, when your own life becomes like that book that you're sitting there turning the chapter and going, wow, this is what's next. This is pretty rad, you know,
Yeah.
because
And you've had some amazing views along the way with all your hikes and nature adventures.
oh,
So
girl,
that's,
yeah. I just got off the trail of 22 days on the John Muir Trail, and it was, I'm telling you, and I took that time. This is the other piece that I want people to understand. Self-care is so important. Self-care is so important. And it's not just simply about, like you mentioned earlier, going to the spa. It's literally about taking time and really allowing yourself to be present with you. And I don't ever apologize for that. Taking 22 days away from my kids, I was like, this is what mom needs to do. Because guess what? You're going to have stuff happen to you in your life too, and you're going to have to do the same thing. So you can learn from watching me.
yeah, well, that goes back to, I mean, I love this, going back to like the very beginning of the conversation of, we can't just put things under the rug and suppress them and not deal with them. Like if we're going to be the best versions of ourselves
Right.
in our life, in our relationships, in our interactions with everybody, we've got to go into the pain and the difficult stuff. Like we've got to feel all the feelings and process it all. And that takes quiet time with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for writing this book. Like I think it's so powerful. Like I really now, especially ending talking about like, don't apologize for self-care. I'm like, can I get away for a week somewhere like in nature and work through it? Like, it's just, it's awesome. Tell everybody where they can find you and follow you and buy the book.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. So my Instagram is Sara Schulting Kranz, and I'm sure you'll have it in the show notes.
Yep.
Long name. It's a long name. People are like, maybe you should change your name. I'm like, I'm not changing my name. Are you kidding me? Goodness. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook. My personal page is Sara Schulting Kranz. And then my business is Live Boldly with Sara Schulting Kranz. It's my Facebook business page. And and you can buy the book you can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any bookstore. So, and you can also find it through my website at sarashultingkranz.com.
Awesome. Love it. Thank you so much.
Can I add this in really quick?
Oh, yeah.
Story that we're releasing, we're set to release the fall of 2021. We're hoping, cross our fingers, COVID, geez. There were 10 women we filmed in the Grand Canyon as well. It is such a beautiful story. It's so inspiring, and it's other women's stories along with my own. And you can watch some of the clips at walkthroughthis.com.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the documentary, like where we'd be able to find that. So it's not out yet.
Not out yet. We are in post-production. Yeah, it's such a beautiful. Laura Van Zee Taylor is directing it, and her film I Am Maris is on Netflix right now. So it's such a beautiful film.
Awesome. I will link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
All right, that'll do it for this week. Thank you again for listening. Make sure to check out her book. Make sure to check out Mel's book, and make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss the rest of our new episodes throughout November, best of episodes in December, and then 2021 is going to be an amazing year for the podcast. I'm going to go ahead and just put that out into the universe. Really excited for the things to come, even though, to be honest, my energy is feeling pretty low today, but I know that just happens. It passes. I'm going to work through it, and we're going to get through this year, and then next year is going to be amazing. So if you have a favorite episode so far, let me know what that is. Leave the podcast a rating review if you haven't already. And that is it. You guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope you all have a wonderful week.